What if the real story behind one of rock music's most heartbreaking disasters was never actually told? What if the version the world heard for decades left out the most disturbing part, the part that points directly at human failure, ignored warnings, and a chain of decisions so avoidable that it almost feels criminal? Because here is the truth. The crash that took Lynyrd Skynyrd didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't strike like lightning from a clear sky. It walked slowly toward them, knocked on the door multiple times, and nobody answered. Today, after all these years, we're going to go through every piece of this story. We are going to look at the warnings, the choices, the mischances, and the final moments. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand why this tragedy didn't just happen to Lynyrd Skynyrd. In many ways, it was allowed to happen. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is not comfortable. But it is the truth. To understand how everything fell apart, you first need to understand what Lynyrd Skynyrd actually was. Not just as a band, but as a force. These men came from Jacksonville, Florida. They were not born into wealth or privilege. They scraped their way up from local bars and small stages, changing their name multiple times and getting rejected more times than anyone cared to count. But something about them refused to die. Ronnie Van Zant, the band's lead singer, was the beating heart of everything. He had this rough, honest quality that people connected with immediately. He didn't sing at you. He sang with you. He made you feel like he understood your life because he was living a version of it himself. Alongside him were Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Leon Wilkeson, Billy Powell, and Artemis Pyle, a group of musicians who together created something that was bigger than any one of them individually. Their sound was Southern rock at its most raw and powerful. It mixed blues guitar with country storytelling and hard rock energy in a way that no one had ever quite done before. Songs like Gimme 3 Steps, Tuesday's Gone, and Simple Man spread far beyond the American South and built a fan base that was deeply personal and fiercely loyal. Then came Free Bird. If you have never felt a song move through you like a living thing, Free Bird is the closest example rock music has ever produced. That long, soaring guitar solo near the end became more than music. It became a ritual. Audiences would shout for it at concerts across the country. Radio stations received more requests for it than almost anything else. It turned Lynyrd Skynyrd from a regional act into something timeless. They were not just playing music anymore. They were writing the soundtrack to an entire generation's life. By October of 1977, they were at the very top. Their new album, Street Survivors, had just been released on October 17th, only 3 days before everything changed. The album featured Steve Gaines, a guitarist whose talent had brought something electric and new into the band's sound. Critics were excited. Fans were hungry. The album shot straight up the charts and included That Smell, a song that many would later look back on with chills, given what happened next. The original album cover showed the band standing in front of enormous flames. Within days, that image would feel less like artwork and more like a warning nobody read in time. They were at the peak. They were unstoppable, and something was already quietly going wrong. Now here is where the story stops being sad and starts being something harder to sit with. The plane. The Convair 240 that Lynyrd Skynyrd chartered for their 1977 tour was built in 1948. Think about that number for a moment. 1948. By the time the band climbed aboard, this aircraft had logged over 29,000 hours of flight time. It had been passed from owner to owner over the years, often used far outside the boundaries of regulated passenger service. The safety systems that even 1970s aviation expected were either missing or unreliable on this aircraft. It was old, it was worn, and it had a troubled history that anyone who looked closely could see. The problem was that not enough people looked closely. Or maybe some people looked and chose not to say anything loud enough. Here is the detail that should make your jaw drop. Aerosmith, one of the biggest rock bands in the world at that same time, had already looked at this exact plane for their own 1977 tour. Their management team inspected the Convair 240 and walked away immediately. And the reason they walked away was not a technical report or an aviation document. It was because during the inspection, the pilots of this aircraft were seen drinking Jack Daniels. Not after the flight, not the night before. During the evaluation, Aerosmith's team flagged the safety concerns clearly and chose a different aircraft. That choice very likely saved their lives. Now the question that haunts everything that followed is this. Did Lynyrd Skynyrd's management know about this? Were they warned? And if they were, why did they get on that plane anyway? The answer, as best as history can piece it together, seems to come down to a combination of schedule pressure, cost, and a dangerous trust in things continuing to work out the way they always had. The tour was relentless. Shows were booked. Fans were waiting. Ronnie Van Zant was the kind of man who did not cancel on his audience. He took that connection personally. And so the plane stayed. Even after something deeply alarming happened on an earlier flight, when sparks were visibly coming from a right engine. The concerns raised by band members and crew were pushed aside. Cassie Gaines, the sister of guitarist Steve Gaines and one of the band's backing vocalists, was so frightened that she considered riding in the equipment truck rather than getting back on the aircraft. She had every instinct telling her to stay off that plane. It was Ronnie himself who calmed her down and convinced her to board. He told her that if it was her time to go, it was her time to go. She got on the plane. She never got off. There were conversations happening about switching to a Learjet for the rest of the tour. The band knew the Convair 240 was unreliable. They were close, so close, to making a different choice. But that switch never happened in time. One more flight. Just one more, and then they would fix it. That one more flight was October 20th, 1977, from Greenville, South Carolina, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The early part of the flight was calm. People were relaxed. Some played cards. Others rested. Ronnie Van Zant was asleep on the floor with a pillow under his head. There was no reason yet to feel afraid. Then Artemis Pyle walked toward the cockpit and was told firmly to sit down and buckle his seatbelt. The urgency in that pilot's voice traveled through the cabin like a current. People felt it before they understood it. And then they understood it. Both engines had failed. The plane had run out of fuel. Not because of a storm. Not because of a mechanical mystery. Because of fuel management errors so basic that investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board could barely believe what they were reading. The official investigation revealed that the crew had been running the engines on an auto-rich fuel mixture setting, a setting designed only for takeoff and climbing, not for long cruising flight. It burns through fuel dramatically faster. The standard procedure would have been to switch to an auto-lean setting for the cruise portion. That switch was never made. On top of that, the pilots had miscalculated how much fuel remained. And in the final desperate moments, when they attempted to transfer fuel between tanks to keep the engines running, they accidentally jettisoned the remaining fuel into the open air. It was gone in an instant. Any last chance of making an emergency landing disappeared with it. This was not a mystery. This was not fate. This was a series of basic, avoidable human errors stacked on top of each other until there was no margin left. The plane came down into swampy, heavily wooded terrain near Gillsburg, Mississippi. Survivors later described the sound of impact as something like 1,000 baseball bats hitting the fuselage all at once. The cockpit broke away from the rest of the plane and slammed into a tree, killing both pilots instantly. Wings were torn off. The tail section came apart. For those seated toward the rear, survival was possible, but no one came through without serious injury. Ronnie Van Zant, asleep on the floor, died in the crash. He was 29 years old, 3 months away from turning 30. He had told people for years, his family, his bandmates, journalists, that he would never live to see 30. His wife, Judy, said that the moment she heard about the crash, she already knew he was gone. He had told her so many times, and with such conviction, that she had stopped thinking of it as talk. She knew he believed it. The haunting thing is that he was right. Steve Gaines died in the crash. Cassie Gaines, who had almost stayed behind, died in the crash. The assistant road manager and both pilots also lost their lives. Artemis Pyle, despite broken ribs, crawled free from the wreckage and walked through swamp and darkness and barbed wire fence until he reached a farmhouse. The homeowner, thinking he was a dangerous stranger, shot him in the shoulder before Pyle managed to gasp the words "plane crash." That single call brought emergency services to the site and began what would be a long, grueling rescue of the survivors. Gary Rossington survived with 2 broken arms, a shattered leg, a punctured stomach, multiple broken ribs, and injuries that would require surgeries and cause him chronic pain for the rest of his life. Leon Wilkeson was declared dead 3 separate times during the rescue and somehow survived each time, only to carry the damage from that night in his body for the rest of his life. He died in 2001. Alan Collins, who co-wrote so many of the band's greatest songs, survived the crash but faced a devastating car accident in 1986 that left him paralyzed from the waist down. He died in 1990. Gary Rossington, the last surviving founding member, passed away in March 2023. With him went the final living connection to the original band. The story of Lynyrd Skynyrd is not simply a tragedy. It is a warning. It is the story of what happens when warning signs are ignored because the schedule is too tight, the cost is too high, or the feeling that things will work out just this once is too comfortable to let go of. Aerosmith saw the same plane, the same pilots, and walked away. Lynyrd Skynyrd saw the sparks coming from the engine and got back on anyway. The mystery, as the title of this video promises, has been solved. And it is not good. It never was. What it is preventable. And that is the part that still hurts the most all these decades later. Free Bird plays on. The music survives. But 6 people didn't have to die in a swamp in Mississippi that night in October 1977. That truth sits underneath every note, and it always will. If this story moved you the way it moved us putting it together, hit that like button and leave your thoughts down in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories behind music's most legendary names. And click the next video on your screen right now, because the next story is one you definitely have not heard before.